Let's talk about turbos. So what are turbos and how do they work? So turbos are essentially an air pump that forces extra air into the engine, creating a false atmosphere. So a naturally aspirated engine is under the pressure of 1 atmosphere, which is the air that you and I are breathing right now. And if you have forced induction, that's false atmosphere. So if you have 14.7 psi, you have essentially 2 atmospheres of absolute air pressure. Anyway, I'll get into atmosphere in another video. But turbos work by using wasted exhaust gas, spinning a turbine blade, and channeling that gas into a turbine wheel, which runs on the back of a common shaft, and there's a second turbine blade, which then creates air volume, which is then pressurized. In fact, I'll show you what I mean by this. So there's exhaust gas coming out of here. Now this car is turbocharged, however, so there's still exhaust gas coming out of here. It's actually starting to get pretty hot now. So there's exhaust velocity, and this is essentially wasted air in terms of there's velocity and heat on a naturally aspirated engine. So if you can channel this air, this exhaust gas, into the turbine side of a turbo, you essentially are creating a way to drive the turbine wheel. So now I've gotten that out of the way. There's 2 main ways how a turbo works in terms of efficiency. The first is air velocity being directed through the turbine side of the turbo, and then the second is heat. So by using exhaust gas to spin the turbine side of the turbo, this obviously creates heat inside the turbo. And so when air gets hot, it actually expands and creates a high pressure. The air molecule actually expands once it gets hot, yet the air is less dense when it's hot. So you have more volume but less density. Again, I'm happy to talk about density altitude on another video. It sort of goes into, if you're a pilot or you're into planes, you probably know a lot about density altitude as well. So it's actually a really important topic if you're flying. If you're just driving your stock BMW on the street, it doesn't really matter that much. So the air is then pressurized on the compressor side of the turbo, which is the cold side, and then it normally goes through some sort of intercooler, either an air-to-air or a water-to-air intercooler, and then it's then plumbed into the intake manifold. A turbocharged engine is so much more efficient than a supercharged engine due to the supercharger being spun off the accessory drive, which adds to parasitic loss. So in essence, if you have 20 psi on a turbo, 20 psi on a supercharger, assuming that they output similar amounts of CFM and the air temperature is similar on both applications, the turbo will always make more power just due to the fact that there's no additional parasitic drag or loss. Potentially maybe if the water pump has to work a bit harder to cool it down, but that's really about it. So you need a turbo manifold of sorts. I'm not going to talk about turbo manifolds in this video, otherwise this video will be about 30 minutes long, but I'll talk about turbo manifolds on my next video. In short, there's like a log style, a twin scroll, a mono scroll, equal length. That's normally always the best for overall power, especially if the piping diameter and the actual bends are not too severe for the sound. If you have a log style manifold on, say, a 6-cylinder compared to a twin scroll or an equal length manifold on a 6-cylinder, the twin scroll or equal length will always sound better, and it's normally a little bit more efficient as well because there isn't excess back pressure and heat buildup inside the turbo manifold and therefore the turbo. So heat is really good for turbos, but only to a certain point, where if your exhaust gas temperatures are so high, then the turbo's then out of its efficiency range. Again, I'll do a whole separate video on talking about the efficiency ranges of turbos and what they mean, and often why sometimes adding more boost is actually worse for your engine on a stock turbo compared to upgrading the turbo and running less boost. Because if you think about it, air pressure is actually a restriction. If you have less air pressure but more volume, that's actually more efficient. So sometimes adding more boost isn't actually ideal. In terms of general turbo design, there's 2 variations. You can either get a journal bearing or a ball bearing. And ball bearings are always more efficient, but they're always more expensive. The actual bearing runs on a set of ball bearings compared to a journal bearing, which is just one big bearing. And then in terms of the actual turbo, like the internal design, there's normally 3 different main types that are commonly used. There's a mono scroll, which is just the conventional style. Then there's a twin scroll turbo, which has got 2 separate inlet pathways. And then the third one, which is mostly used on diesels, is the variable vane technology. The reason why this is used on diesels mostly is due to the lower exhaust gas temperature, where the actual vanes inside the turbo are just not strong enough to withstand the heat of a petrol engine. Unfortunately, my outro got corrupted, so I'm making an even better one. So if you like this video, make sure to subscribe, check out the store at shopmcgarage.com, and comment below if you have any other video suggestions. Stay tuned.